You are listening to Verb Minute, where words do remain.
Hello and welcome to this episode of Right the Wrongs on gender pronouns. I'm Tanfei and please refer to me with she and her.
And I'm Mason. Tanfei, could you explain why you specified your pronouns?
That's just to make sure that the pronouns associated with me reflect the gender that I identify with. The English language, as multiple other languages, along with the cosmopolitan culture, has been undergoing certain transformations to achieve greater inclusivity and diversity. In particular, the rise of gender-neutral pronouns and their popular acceptance are an undoubted breakthrough of contemporary society.
It is a relatively recent phenomenon.
Partially. But the 21st century is not the first time where we see an expanding lexicon of non-binary pronouns. Writers have been struggling to coin a suitable pronoun all along, in particular, ones that will be gender-neutral. Dennis Barron, a linguist, was successful at creating a catalogue of various English neuters throughout history. Some of them, like ip, hister, and nis, were dated back to the late 18th and early 19th century. The origin of contemporary gender-neutral writing can be traced back to the late 70s, where feminist Protestant theologists attempted to rewrite biblical texts to include women. For instance, terms like Son of God were to be replaced by Children of God. The gender of God was also contested, with the question, why not she? Similar ideas were stirred up throughout the religious world. In Sweden, for instance, the rewrite of religious cantics following the 2000 Bible edition led to polemical debates in 2017.
So what does gender inclusivity in language really entail?
Inclusive speech can have various meanings and repercussions depending on the language itself. Some languages, like French, Spanish, and Russian, have grammatical genders, which means that there is a noun-class system where the gender of the noun agrees with other grammatical elements, like adjectives, articles, pronouns, and verbs. For example, the French word for beautiful has two different forms for singular objects. One for feminine singular nouns like a flower, the other for masculine ones like a bed. Other grammatically gendered languages may have more than two gender categories, whereas in English, there is no grammatical genders and inanimate objects are neuters, referred to by the pronoun it. But some words that refer to professions like fireman or policeman are still gendered. Moreover, non-gendered inanimate nouns can be referred to as he or she by convention or as a particular expression, like the pronoun she and her assigned to a country or a ship. On the other hand, in some languages like Finnish and Estonian, even the third-person singular pronoun for people is not gendered. Both he and she are referred to as han in Finnish and ta in Estonian. Therefore, what inclusive speech entails vary widely based on how relevant the concept of gender is in different languages and grammar systems. Some feminist linguists focus on the assumption of a masculine singular pronoun in sentences like everyone loves his mother, while others target the precedence of masculinity in plural subjects like les étudiants, the students, or in job titles like the professor or the senator, even though feminine forms of such professions also exist. Now the topic is changing. Instead of affirming the binary gender perceptions by fighting over which word should be feminine or masculine, the latest initiatives focus on doing away with any binary labels, at least for words that are used to describe humans.
That's very interesting. So how far have various languages integrated non-binary genders? Could you give us some examples?
Sure, let's start with English. According to various sources, there are about 14 options of non-binary pronouns in English. However, hundreds are believed to exist. Some of them have come from other languages, like sie from German. Others were derived from literary works, like per from a novel called Women on the Edge of Time. Some are associated with animals, mythical creatures, and plants. The pioneering institution of higher education to implement the option of choosing a preferred gender pronoun during the administrative registration was the University of Vermont. There, one could choose between he, she, they, sie, or name only. Harvard University then followed the lead and added an option to specify one's pronouns in 2015. In the Faculty of Arts and Sciences, about 10,000 students have specified their preferred pronouns, with around 1% choosing a pronoun other than he or she. Multiple countries have introduced legal recognitions for non-binary or third gender classifications. In some countries, such classifications may only be available to congenitally intersex individuals based on medical assessments. In other countries, they can be a marker of self-determined identity. Australia is among the first few countries to recognize a third classification, following the recognition of Alex McFarlane as having indeterminate sex, reported in 2003. In the United States, an Oregon Circuit Court ruling in 2016 allowed Jamie Shoup to obtain a non-binary gender identity in legal documents. Furthermore, many countries are redefining the relevance of gender categories. At the forefront of this is the Netherlands, where the gender marker will be removed from Dutch ID cards by 2025. If compared with the Western European countries, it is generally accepted to perceive Eastern Europe as more conservative. In fact, it is partially true. Even linguistically, Russian, Polish, Ukraine, and Belarusian tend to complicate their languages by adding gender-related endings, pronouns that will vary according to the constitution of the group one is talking about, and use as many orthographical flags in one sentence as possible to clarify one's gender. While feminists, disregarding their subdivision, root for more feminitives to be added in the language. For example, the distinction between a male doctor and a female doctor in Russian. Some strictly oppose this idea. As Stefan Van Lee states in their online magazine Dialogue, he believes that bringing additional gender-neutral pronouns and feminitives into Russian will only pointlessly complicate an already difficult language. In his view, an identification of one's gender was historically important when men were perceived as rational, objective, and reliable sources of information, whereas one should have ignored what women had in mind. Nowadays, with the resolute strive towards equality, people's gender plays no importance in the dialogue, as well as specification of skin color, social class, sexual orientation, and religion. Thus, the emphasis of one's gender should lose its importance in dialogues, and the value of gender identification should be diminished. As such, he proposes an opposite direction to the feminist solution. Russians should renounce any other pronouns and use on or he for everyone, leaving the language fully gender-neutral. However, such a stance is unpopular and has been highly criticized by both conservatives and liberals. In contrast, different third-person singular pronouns were used in different dynasties in ancient China, and many coexisted to serve different grammatical or expressional functions. But the gender differentiation never really existed in ancient Chinese. Some of the third-person pronouns are all-inclusive, as they can be referred to objects and humans at the same time. The current Chinese equivalents of he, she, and it were coined in the 1920s when the New Culture movement sought to westernize and modernize Chinese culture in order to make it on par with colonial powers. All three pronouns have the same pronunciation as ta, but their logograms or written forms are different. Interestingly, unlike she and it, the logogram of the character he already existed in ancient Chinese, and the way it is written emphasizes on the grammatical object being a human. But now, the same character is used exclusively for males and as a generic third-person pronoun referring to people. The coinage of she was controversial at the start, not only because it seemed to single out women in the era of feminism, but also because the written character of she comes from replacing the part that denotes human in the character of he by a part that denotes female. Here, the irony is that by recognizing women, we singled them out as an afterthought and an outlier. Even though the gendered pronouns in simplified Chinese have long been well accepted in the standard of writing, the inclusive writing initiative nowadays uses the word ta, written as the capital letter T and A, to denote both the Chinese equivalents of he and she. Another idea is to change the gender indicative part of the pronouns into the letter X. These have become more popular on new forms of media and are used by authors who want to signal their progressiveness when it comes to gender issues. The debate on inclusive writing in France was reinforced in 2017 with the publication of new scholar textbooks written in inclusive French. Traditionally, in French, when speaking about masculine and feminine nouns in the same sentence, the masculine will take precedence. However, inclusive writing denounces that. In 2017, Edouard Philippe, the PM at the time, refused to implement inclusive writing in official text, which fueled again the polemic. Alongside the debate on gender issues in inclusive writing, its critics also point out a so-called unnaturalness of writing that would damage the French language. However, this debate on the modification of the French language has been strongly present in the French society, even outside the domain of gender considerations, as shown in the words of Bourdieu in his essay, Rethinking the State, Genesis and Structure of the Bureaucratic Field, published in 1993. Now, when at a particular moment, the state or any of its representatives undertake a form of orthography, as was done with similar effects a century ago, i.e., to undo by decree what the state had ordered by decree, this immediately triggers the indignation protest of a good number of those whose status depends on writing. For those who possess spelling to the point where they are possessed by it, the perfectly arbitrary ph of the word nénuphar has become so evidently inextricable from the flower it designates that they can, in all good faith, invoke nature and the natural to denounce an intervention of the state aimed at reducing the arbitrariness of a spelling which, in all evidence, is in itself the product of an earlier arbitrary intervention.
That's a lot to think about. Do you know how our peers feel about creating a new category of pronouns for gender identities?
Actually, yes. Our team conducted a survey among the multilingual community that we share on social media. We collected 162 individual responses from people largely between 16 to 25 years of age. 77.2% of them are aware of the existence of gender-neutral pronouns in English, but only 56.2% of them know any in their mother tongue. Many of them cited examples like il in French, hen in Swedish, je in Lithuanian, xi in German, latinx in Spanish, and ta with an x in Chinese. For respondents who did not hear their examples being mentioned, please kindly forgive the omission as a desperate attempt to avoid further butchering people's languages with wrong pronunciations. Furthermore, only 7.5% of the respondents specify their pronouns when they introduce themselves or when they draft their resumes. Roughly 7 in 10 use she or he for others based on physical appearances until told otherwise, and the same figure goes for the proportion of them who have friends that specify their pronouns. When asked on the ideal situation about the usage of gender pronouns, the opinions are very divided. 51.9% prefer to use conventional pronouns like she and he for everyone until someone specifies their pronoun of choice, while 43.2% believes it is better to assume gender-neutral pronouns as the default until told not to. Only 8 respondents believed that we should do away with the binary divide and use a universal third-person pronoun for everyone.
Well, it definitely is tricky when it comes to the oxymoron of standardizing the diversity in languages.
Yes, while some argue that it is only natural for languages to integrate new words and expressions as time evolves, and one only has to flip through a thesaurus to understand how languages thrive on plurality. Others raise the issue of administrative inefficiencies or common confusions, when we have multiple pronouns to refer to the third person in legal documents or everyday speech. On one hand, allowing people to specify their non-binary gender identities and developing a lexicon for it is undoubtedly a step towards better inclusivity. On the other hand, we need to consider if such changes in our expressions outpace the change in people's perceptions and prejudice. A label of the gender X can be unjustly misconstrued by employers, custom officers, or even doctors. Maybe it is the best to follow the Dutch and do away with the identity of gender altogether. After all, if we think of it as a spectrum of continuous variation just like height, categories are less relevant. But then the important question is, where should gender be still relevant? And that should be left to each specific culture and society to decide.
That's the end of today's podcast. Feel free to engage with us on our social media channels. Let us know what you think about pronouns and gender identities by following us on Facebook and Instagram. And join us for further discussions on our Telegram group, or leave us a comment at theverbamanagepodcast@gmail.com. This episode was written by Sophia, Tanfei, and Plume, produced by Tanfei, and brought to you by Right the Wrongs under Verba Managed. The next episode of Right the Wrongs will talk about human trafficking. You can find the program wherever you find your podcasts, bringing you detailed updates on pressing human rights issues. Until next time, take care.